I don't remember the exact moment I started to feel like a stranger in my own home, but it must have been sometime around last October. The leaves had just started to fall, whispering dry secrets across the sidewalk as the wind swept them in spirals. Our neighborhood in upstate New York was one of those quiet, tree-lined communities where people waved from porches and left fresh pies at each other's doors. On the outside, everything looked perfect, but inside our little white and brick colonial, something had shifted. And I was the last to know. That night, I had just come downstairs for a glass of water. I wasn't trying to be sneaky, but when I heard my husband's voice, low, cautious, coming from his office, I stopped at the end of the hallway and listened. "No, she doesn't suspect anything," he whispered. "It's done. I handled it." He paused. "Yes, she signed it. She didn't even read the papers." My blood turned cold. I didn't know who he was talking to. I didn't even know what he was talking about. But something in his tone, some arrogant finality, froze me in place. I stood barefoot on the hardwood floor, heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. He ended the call. I rushed back upstairs without making a sound. From the hallway, I watched him walk out of the office a minute later. His expression was blank, unreadable. He glanced toward the staircase, but I had already ducked back behind the banister. I listened to his footsteps retreat into the kitchen. The refrigerator opened. The sound of a bottle cap being twisted. Then silence again. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to him, listening to the rise and fall of his breath, wondering how long he'd been lying to me. My name is Emily Hart. I'm 35. I used to believe in love like they describe in novels, the kind that builds a life from nothing and never questions the weight of loyalty. I believed that about David. We'd been married for 10 years. Through the early days of ramen noodles and late rent checks. Through fertility treatments and miscarriages and one tiny miracle, our daughter, Olivia, who just turned 6. We built everything together. Or at least I thought we did. David is an architect. The kind with those charcoal-smudged hands and brooding eyes. He used to draw little sketches of dream houses for us on the backs of receipts. I still have one, folded inside my wedding album, a little farmhouse with wraparound porches and hanging ferns. Someday, he'd written in a quick scrawl, "For us." When his career took off 3 years ago, we started looking for a real place. We found this one, 3 bedrooms, a fireplace, big bay windows in the front room. I fell in love with it the moment we stepped inside. It was older, but it had character. David promised to renovate it himself, piece by piece. And he did. I picked every paint color. I picked out the backsplash tiles and debated endlessly over cabinet knobs. I planted the tulips out front. I repainted Olivia's room twice because she couldn't decide between seafoam and lavender. This wasn't just a house. It was home. My home. So the thought that something might be happening behind my back, something involving this house, was too terrifying to ignore. The next morning, I got Olivia ready for school like always. David had already left for work. I sat in my car in the school parking lot for 20 minutes after drop-off, gripping the steering wheel, thinking. Then I drove home and did something I never thought I'd do. I broke into my husband's office. The door wasn't locked, but he always kept it shut when he wasn't home. His desk was spotless, as usual. David was meticulous. Everything had a place. But I noticed a stack of manila folders tucked into the back corner of the bottom drawer. I opened the first one and froze. It was a deed. Not just any deed. It was our house. Our address. Our property. But the names on it didn't say Emily and David Hart. It said David Hart and Helen Hart. Helen. His mother. I felt the blood drain from my face. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. A clerical error. Something he'd done before we bought the house and forgot to change. But then I saw the date 4 months ago. 4 months ago, I had been recovering from surgery. I had just come home from the hospital after a complicated ovarian cyst removal. David had taken care of everything, including the paperwork for refinancing the house to help with the medical bills. At least, that's what he told me. He had asked me to sign a few forms while I was on the couch with a heating pad across my abdomen. He kissed my forehead and said, "Don't worry about it. Just sign, babe." I signed. Without reading. Like a fool. I sank to my knees in the middle of the room, my heart splintering into pieces. I didn't confront him right away. Something inside me, some primal voice, told me to stay quiet and gather more information. I called a real estate lawyer the next day. Pretended I was just curious about the deed on a joint property. When I gave her the names, there was a pause on the line. "Are you sure you're not listed on the deed?" she asked. "I'm positive," I said. She cleared her throat. "Well, then legally you have no ownership rights." I felt like I was choking. "But I live here. I bought furniture. I paid bills." "I understand," she said gently. "But if your name isn't on the deed, and you didn't sign a legal ownership agreement, the law won't recognize your claims. Especially if this was signed recently and notarized." Notarized. That word hit me like a slap. He'd made sure it was airtight. He hadn't made a mistake. He hadn't overlooked anything. He planned this. But why? That night, I watched him even more carefully. The way he avoided eye contact when I asked casual questions. The way he smiled at me like everything was normal. The way he hugged Olivia goodnight, and then went downstairs to his office, locking the door behind him. He didn't know I knew. I started digging deeper. I logged into our joint bank account. There was nothing unusual. But when I searched his name through a credit history tool I had used before, I noticed something strange. A mortgage account under his name and his mother's. A loan that didn't show up on our joint credit report. How deep did this go? I felt like I was living with a stranger. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about betrayal on a level I couldn't comprehend. David and I had talked about our future in this house. Raising Olivia here. Retiring here. We had picked the damn wallpaper for the upstairs bathroom together. But while I was dreaming about growing old in this place, he was plotting to cut me out. I kept replaying it in my head, his phone call, the way he said, "She doesn't suspect anything." He wasn't just hiding something. He was celebrating my ignorance. And that was what made me snap. I began documenting everything. I took photos of the deed, of the bank records. I created a timeline. I even recorded one of his phone calls by planting a voice-activated recorder under the bookshelf outside his office. I didn't care if it was legal. I needed truth. And I was going to take back everything he thought he stole from me. I couldn't believe how easily lies could live under the same roof as truth. They coexisted like shadows and light, undetectable until one decided to devour the other. Over the next few days, I became someone I didn't recognize. I smiled at David across the breakfast table while tracking his every move. I helped Olivia with her homework while secretly recording phone calls on a burner phone I bought in cash. I read bedtime stories, kissed my daughter's forehead, and then spent the rest of the night scrolling through county land records, searching for anything David had touched. Every time he left the house, I ransacked his office, his laptop, even his coat pockets. And what I found, piece by piece, it built a narrative more sinister than I had imagined. David hadn't just transferred the house deed. He had opened a joint bank account with his mother. He had applied for a construction permit to renovate the attic, but not under our household. Under hers. There were emails between him and a realtor. Confidential. Unread by me. One stood out. "Once my wife's name is completely off everything, we'll be ready to list. Just need to time it right." List? Sell the house. Without me? I printed that email and stared at it for what felt like an eternity. My mouth was dry, my head pulsing. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was exile. He was planning to erase me from our life, sell the home I built, and leave me with nothing but memories and bills. I looked around the kitchen. The cabinets I'd chosen. The rug I'd saved 3 paychecks for. Olivia's art on the fridge. What kind of man schemes to rob the mother of his child of her home? I needed help, but I couldn't go to my friends. David was charming. To them, we were that Pinterest-perfect couple who threw themed barbecues and hosted neighborhood movie nights in our backyard. If I told them he was plotting against me, they'd look at me like I was losing my mind. I thought about telling my sister, but even she might have tried to mediate before believing me. So I stayed silent. But silence, I learned, is a breeding ground for madness. One night, David came home late. Too late. His tie was loose, his hair windswept. He said something about a delayed meeting, but he didn't look me in the eye when he said it. I handed him a plate of reheated dinner, watched him from the sink as he ate. That's when I noticed it. A subtle scent.
Perfume. Sweet.
Floral. Not mine. I didn't ask. I just smiled and handed him his wine. And when he turned away, I watched as something inside me fractured and turned to steel. The next morning I made a plan. I had to do this quietly, legally, methodically. I went back to the real estate lawyer I'd spoken to, this time in person. Her name was Judith Black. Middle-aged, sharp eyes, no-nonsense attitude. I showed her the documents I had gathered. The photos, the emails. I explained everything in detail, leaving out the part about the hidden recorder for now. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair and said, "He's preparing to remove you from everything, financially and physically. He's not just trying to claim the house. He's preparing for a divorce, or worse, to make you disappear from it altogether." I stared at her. He can't do that. We have a daughter. We've been married 10 years. Judith raised an eyebrow. Do you have a prenuptial agreement?
No.
Do you have joint ownership on any of your assets? Our cars. But the house. She tapped her pen on the table. He's making a move. You need to make one first. I leaned in.
How?
And she told me. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. combing through everything Judith recommended. The homestead exemption rules, spousal property laws, even loopholes in fraudulent deed transfers. I discovered that if I could prove coercion, deception, or mental duress when signing those refinancing papers, I could challenge the deed. Especially if I had evidence. And I had a little, but I needed more. So the next day, I did something risky. I planted a GPS tracker on David's car. He'd gotten sloppy lately, probably assuming I was still in the dark. So when he told me he was working late, again that Friday, I didn't argue. Instead, I watched his little to move across the map from our suburban neighborhood into downtown. He wasn't at work.
He was at a condo building.
And when I zoomed in through the satellite image, I saw something that made my heart split open like glass. His mother's name was on the mailbox out front. When he came home that night, I was sitting on the couch, pretending to read. He walked in casually. "Hey babe, long day. I'm exhausted." I said, not looking up. He kissed my head. I didn't flinch. He went upstairs to shower. And I whispered to myself, "You're almost done hiding, David. I hope you enjoyed the last lie you'll ever tell me under this roof." But things didn't stay quiet for long. The next day, I found something far worse than anything I had uncovered so far. A notarized power of attorney form.
Filed. Signed.
Recent. Granting his mother legal authority over David's affairs. That meant if he left town, she could sell the house without his presence. And without mine. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about erasure. He was planning something massive. And fast. I needed to move quicker. I went to the county clerk's office the next morning and pulled all recent filings on our property. There, buried in the records, was a quiet motion to put the house under temporary sale review, meaning it was pending some kind of off-market transfer. I sprinted back to Judith's office with copies in hand. She looked over the papers and slammed her hand on the table. He's about to sell it, possibly under an LLC. Can he legally do that without telling me? Technically?
Yes.
Morally? Absolutely not. But we can file an injunction right now.
Do it, I said.
And that's when everything began to unravel for him. 3 days later, David came storming into the house. I was in the kitchen. Olivia was at school. He threw a stack of papers on the counter. "What the hell is this?" I didn't blink. "Looks like a court order. Blocking any property transfers on the house for the next 60 days. You went behind my back?" "I followed your example." His face went pale. "You don't understand, Emily. You're making a huge mistake." "No, David," I said, stepping closer. "You made a mistake when you thought I wouldn't find out." He opened his mouth, probably to lie again, but I was done. I slid the manila folder across the table. Inside were printed emails, bank transfers, the GPS tracker log,
Copies of deeds.
photos of the power of attorney. You were going to sell this house behind my back. You forged my name. You plotted with your mother. You tried to cut me out of everything. He looked at the folder like it might explode. And then he whispered, "I did it to protect us." I laughed. Out loud. Cold and hard.
No.
You did it to protect yourself. That night, he didn't sleep in our bed. And for the first time in weeks, I did. Not because the war was over, but because I had finally fired my first shot. The quiet after confrontation is deceptive. It feels like safety, like resolution. But it's a silence that hums with danger, because nothing is ever that simple. After David and I clashed in the kitchen, he moved into the guest room. The space between us grew colder by the hour. There were no more excuses, no more rehearsed smiles, no morning coffee small talk. Just tension, thick and unforgiving. I thought I'd seen the worst of it. I hadn't, because 2 days later, Judith called with a voice that shook my spine. "You need to come to my office."
Now.
I canceled everything, dropped Olivia off early at my sister's, and drove through red lights to get there. Judith was already standing at the door, waving me in. "There's something I didn't expect," she said, closing the blinds behind us. "It's not just about the house anymore." She handed me a manila envelope. Inside were copies of wire transfers, 5 in total. Large sums. Moved from our joint account to an account under David's mother's name, and then to another in a private wealth bank located overseas. "Switzerland," she said. "Hidden assets. Offshore account. And he used your forged signature on at least 2 of those transfers." I blinked. "What?" My voice cracked. "Are you saying this is criminal? It's fraud. It's financial abuse. And, depending on how this plays out, it could become a federal case." I felt like I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just about the house. David was stealing everything. I didn't go home that night. I needed space, time to think. I booked a room at a quiet little inn on the other side of the city. I sat in that dim room staring at the ceiling for hours, until something inside me finally broke open. The fear turned into fury. I wasn't going to just protect myself anymore. I was going to fight. The next morning, I called my old friend Melissa, an investigative journalist who'd once exposed a senator's corruption in a front-page exposé. I told her just enough to get her attention, and she agreed to meet. Over coffee, I laid it all out: the forged documents, the offshore transfers, the suspicious realtor contact, the power of attorney. Melissa sat in stunned silence. "This is big, like, story of the month big." "I don't want publicity," I said. "I want backup. I want to expose him so thoroughly that when he tries to run, he'll have nowhere left to hide." Melissa nodded. "Then let's get you what you need." She handed me a small device. "Audio recorder. This one's better than your phone. Clip it to your bra or under your sweater. Catch everything." I swallowed hard, because that's when I decided I was going to confront him again, but this time, I'd record it all. When I got home, David was sitting in the living room, scrolling through his phone like everything was normal. He looked up. "Where were you?" "I needed time to think," I replied, carefully lowering my bag to the floor. He nodded slowly. "We do need to talk." I turned on the recorder beneath my sweater and walked toward him, calm as a glass lake. "Then talk," I said. "Start from the beginning." And he did. But nothing, not even Judith's warning, not the hidden bank accounts, not the forged signatures, could have prepared me for what came out of his mouth next. He looked at me, eyes cold but oddly calm, and said, "I was never supposed to marry you." My breath stopped. "What?" "You weren't the plan," he said. "You were the mistake that turned out to be useful." I froze. My brain couldn't catch up to the words. He continued. "My mother always had a plan for me. Marry rich, invest early, never fall in love. But you," he scoffed, "you were different. You were emotional, messy, a risk. But you came from old money. That family land you inherited? That trust fund you barely touch." He leaned forward. "You were a financial asset." I stepped back. "You used me," I whispered. He didn't flinch. At first.
Yes.
But then you got too attached. So I gave you a child. It kept you busy while I did what I had to do. My hands were shaking. I loved you, I said. He tilted his head. That was your choice. I left the room before I broke. I ran upstairs, shut the door, and crumbled to the floor. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I played the audio back over and over, listening to his confession, memorizing every twisted word. This wasn't just betrayal. It was calculated manipulation. I thought I'd been living in a partnership, but I had been targeted. From day one. I met with Melissa again the next day and gave her the audio. She stared at me, eyes wide. Jesus, M. This isn't just a personal tragedy. This is premeditated fraud. You could take him for everything. I nodded slowly. That's the plan. But it got worse before it got better. Later that week, Olivia came home from school with something strange. A flyer for an open house with our address on it. I snatched it from her hands. My heart dropped. David had listed the house. Without my knowledge. Despite the court injunction, he was trying to bypass the system. He was using a shell company to file it under a different zoning name. Judith confirmed it later that evening. He's desperate. He's trying to move the sale through a private buyer before the injunction becomes a legal block. I was done playing defense. It was time to attack. I hired a forensic accountant. They traced the funds back even further, to earlier in our marriage. David had been funneling my family inheritance into dummy investments. Real estate, fake business expenses, even a stock portfolio tied to an alias. He'd stolen nearly $400,000 over the course of 5 years. And hidden every dime. I filed a formal lawsuit that same week. Fraud, emotional abuse, financial coercion, and property theft. We served David while he was at lunch with his mother. Melissa caught the entire moment on camera from across the cafe. His face?
Pale.
Like a ghost. He stormed into the house that night, yelling, "You think you're going to win? I've covered my tracks for years, Emily." I held up the recorder. Not anymore. He stared at it, silent.
Defeated.
Because now it wasn't just between him and me.
It was documented.
It was recorded. It was war. And I wasn't afraid anymore. The house no longer felt like a home. It was a battlefield now. Silent in the halls, but heavy with the threat of emotional landmines around every corner. David didn't sleep in the guest room anymore. He'd started staying out late, disappearing for hours, and coming back reeking of whiskey and arrogance. But I stayed. Not because I was afraid, not anymore. But because I wanted him to see that he couldn't break me. The real climax began not with a bang, but with a letter. Delivered by courier. From David's lawyer. He was countersuing. For emotional harassment, defamation, and, get this, alienation of affection. I read it twice, then laughed. Not a soft laugh, but that bitter, wild kind of laugh that only comes after surviving an emotional hurricane. He was accusing me, after everything he'd done, of ruining his life. The audacity lit a fire in me so deep, so raw, it stripped away the last layers of hesitation. I called Judith, and together we filed an emergency court hearing for full financial disclosure. If he wanted a fight, he was going to get a war. The night before the hearing, he came home drunk. Again. Only this time he was different. "Why are you doing this?" he slurred, swaying in the doorway of our kitchen. I didn't look up from my notes. Because I have to protect myself. And Olivia. He staggered closer. "I gave you everything, everything. You just had to stay quiet." I stood slowly. "You never gave me anything," I said. "You took. You manipulated, lied, and pretended to love me while stealing every piece of my life." He lunged toward the counter, knocking over a glass. "You're nothing without me." But I didn't flinch. I pointed to the security camera in the corner. "I've been recording everything." His face went blank. He hadn't noticed the camera before. That was his first real mistake.
Court day arrived.
I wore black. Not because I was mourning anything, but because I wanted to be a shadow. Silent. Watchful. Unshakable. David came in late, his lawyer whispering in his ear, looking nervous. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with no patience for theatrics, looked between us and got straight to business. Evidence was laid out. First, the wire transfers, the forged signatures. Then came the audio recordings. Melissa had edited them perfectly. The room fell silent as David's voice filled the courtroom. You weren't the plan. You were the mistake that turned out to be useful. His lawyer looked like he was trying not to bury his face in his notes. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Walker, do you deny that this is your voice? David looked like a balloon with a pin stuck in it. It sounds like me, but that could be AI or something. Melissa stood. Your Honor, we had the audio independently verified through forensic analysis. The voice patterns are a match. The judge narrowed her eyes at David. Anything else to add? He sat down, shoulders deflated. Then came the confrontation I had been waiting for. Judith stood and walked the court through the offshore accounts, the false listings the shell company used to relist the house. Every step meticulously laid out. Every lie catalogued. By the end of it, David looked like a man watching his empire burn. Because that's exactly what was happening. But I wasn't done. The judge allowed me to make a personal statement before the court. I stood. My legs didn't shake. My voice was clear. Your Honor, I began. For years, I believed my husband loved me. I believed I was building a life with a partner, not a predator. I trusted him with my home, my child, my finances, my heart. David stared at the floor. But it was all a lie. And not just a betrayal of emotion, but a carefully crafted scam. He didn't just break vows. He broke laws. He robbed me of my security, my dignity, and almost my will to fight. I took a breath. But I'm still standing. Because no matter how much he tried to bury me, I was the one holding the shovel all along. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge blinked slowly, absorbing every word. Verdict? Temporary injunction made permanent. David was banned from selling, transferring, or accessing any of the contested assets. The court ordered a full audit of his finances, pending criminal investigation. And custody? Full rights awarded to me, pending final divorce proceedings. David wasn't just losing the house. He was losing everything. But he wasn't done lashing out. 2 nights later, I found the back door kicked in. Drawers open. Documents missing. And David?
Gone.
I called the police, filed a report. But I already knew where he'd gone. To his mother's house. The same woman who'd helped him orchestrate the property scam. I drove there the next morning, Olivia safely at my sister's. I stood across the street, watching the house. And then, I saw him, packing boxes into the trunk of his mother's car.
Cash.
Laptops. Hard drives. He was running. But not before I took a picture.
Clear as day.
David Walker, mid-escape. Melissa published the story that evening. Front page of her digital outlet. Husband exposed in financial scheme against wife, now under criminal investigation. It went viral within hours. I received emails, messages from women across the country, sharing their own stories, telling me I was brave. But I wasn't brave. I was done being afraid. That night, the police issued a warrant. David Walker became a wanted man. And I walked through the ruins of my home, calm, but never naive again. I didn't just survive him. I defeated him. And the best part? He never saw it coming. You'd think that when the monster flees, the story ends. That when the villain finally disappears, peace returns like a soft breeze through the wreckage. But healing doesn't follow a script. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Other times it limps in, bruised, confused, and out of breath. 3 weeks after David vanished, I stood alone in the house he tried to steal. The air still carried a faint echo of his presence. But it was mine now. Not just in the legal sense, but in the soul of the space. The laughter I once faked to keep the peace had been replaced by real, quiet joy. Books open on the kitchen counter. Tea steeping slowly in the morning light. Olivia's drawings taped proudly to the fridge. But some nights, when the wind held a little too hard and the floor creaked beneath old boards, I glanced toward the door. Not out of fear, but from a deep, primal instinct, like my body remembered what it had endured, even if my mind tried to forget. The police finally tracked David. He was hiding in a rental property under a different name 2 states away. Fake ID. Cash-only lifestyle. They arrested him without incident, but I wasn't there to see it. I didn't need to be. The moment I saw the notification on my phone, David Walker in custody, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding since the night of the forged papers. The court proceedings that followed were swift and devastating for him. Asset forfeiture, restitution, public record exposure. But the final blow came when his own mother, yes, the woman he thought would protect him, turned on him in court. Apparently, he'd promised her a cut of the house's resale. But when he tried to disappear, he didn't include her in the plan. She testified against him in exchange for immunity. The betrayal? Poetic. The irony? Delicious. After the dust settled, Olivia and I moved. Not far, just far enough to start fresh. The new place was smaller, simpler, but it breathed with light. We didn't bring any furniture from the old house. Just a few books, a few photos, and a quiet promise between mother and daughter. We rebuild. Together. One evening, I received a letter. No return address. No postage stamp. Just slid under our new front door. My heart stilled. I picked it up, hands trembling, not from fear, but from knowing. Inside was a single piece of paper.
Typed.
You think you've won, but you only saw half the plan. There are things buried you'll never understand. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts. No signature. No name.
But the tone?
Unmistakable. David. I handed it to the police. They said it was likely a bluff. A last-ditch scare tactic from a desperate man behind bars. But I changed the locks anyway. Set up new cameras. I wouldn't live in fear. But I wouldn't live in denial either. Because now I knew. Monsters don't just vanish. They retreat, reload, and wait. But I was ready this time. 1 month passed. Then 2. The calls stopped. The emails went silent. And then, one early morning, Olivia came to me with a photo she'd drawn. It was of our new home. Just us two. And above the house, a sky full of blue. No clouds. No shadows. Just warmth. I smiled. Because the real ending didn't come with handcuffs or verdicts. It came in healing.
In peace.
In the quiet mornings where fear didn't whisper anymore. Until one day, years later, I got another letter. This one, though, wasn't a threat. It was from a woman. A stranger. She wrote, I read about your story. I wanted to thank you. Because of your courage, I left my husband before it was too late. You saved someone you'll never meet. You saved me. Tears welled up in my eyes. Because that's when I knew. David didn't win. He never could. Because while he plotted in the shadows, I had lit a torch, and others saw the flame. Final line. I thought the house was the prize. But now I see, the real victory was taking my soul back.